The dark hour-be Wilbur Daniel Steele, the returning ship, swam swiftly through the dark, the deep interior breathing of the engines, the singing of wire stays, the huge whispering rush of foam streaming along the waterline. On the body of silence, the footsteps of the doctor came and went nervously along the side of the deck, interrupting only a little, and that a faint and personal disturbance, charging slowly forward through the darkness, dozen paces this way, dozen paces that way. His invisible and agonized face bent forward a little over his breast. He thought to himself, "What dupes! What muddy dupes we are!" Sweat broke for an instant upon his brow and was gone in the steady pressure of the gale. The man upon the cot in the shelter of the cabin companionway uttered no sound at all. He might have been asleep or dead. He lay so still, and he was neither asleep nor dead. His eyes, large, wasted, and luminous, gazed out unwinking from the little darkness of his shelter into the vaster darkness of the night, where a star burned in slow mutations, now high, now sailing low over the rail of the ship. Once he said in a washed and strengthless voice, "That's a bright star, Doctor." If the other heard, he gave no sign. He continued charging slowly back and forth, his large, dim shoulders hunched over his neck, his hands locked behind him, his teeth showing faintly, gray between the fleshy lips which hung open a little to his breathing. "It's dark," he said of a sudden, bringing up before the cot in the companionway. God, how dark it is! There was something incoherent and mutilated about it, as though the cry had rent the tissues of his throat. "I'm not myself tonight," he muttered with a trace of shame. Howlet spoke slowly from his pillow. "Wouldn't be the subs tonight. You're not that sort. You know I've seen you in the zone, and we're well west of them by this anyway. And as you say, it's very dark." "It's not that dark. Not that," the doctor repeated, with the same sense of something tearing him. He rocked for a moment on his thick legs and began to talk. "That is but this war," his conscience retorted. "I shall not go on so. It's not fair. Not fair at all to carry on so to the men who are wounded and dying. I should not carry on to the dead." And all along the words kept pouring forth from his lips. "No, I'm not a coward, not especially. You know I'm not a coward, Howlet. You know that. But just now, tonight, somehow, the whole black truth of the thing has come out and got me, jumped out of the dark and got me by the neck. Howlet, look here. I've kept a stiff lip since the first. I've said we'll win this war. It's been a matter of course so far as I know. Never a hint of doubt has shadowed my mind. Even when things went bad in the end, I've said, in the end, of course, we're bound to win." He tore himself away once more and started slowly into the darkness with his nose bent down, butting like a large, overheated animal possessed with a mentality. "But do we want to win, Howlet?" His question, very faint across the subdued breathings and showering of the ship, fetched the doctor up. He stood for a moment, rocking on his legs and staring at the face of the questioner, still and faintly luminous on the invisible cot. Then he laughed briefly, shook himself, and ignored the preposterous words. He recollected tardily that the fellow was pretty well gone. "No," he went on. "Up to tonight I've never doubted. No one in the world, in our part of the world, has doubted. The proposition was absurd to begin with. Prussia and her fringe of hangers-on to stand against the world, to stand against the very drift and destiny of civilization? Impossible. A man can't do the impossible, that's logic, Howlet, and that's common sense. They might have their day of it, their little hour, because they had the jump. But in the end, but look at them. Will you look at them? That's what's got me tonight, Howlet. Look at them. There they stand. They won't play the game, won't abide at all by the rules of logic or common sense. Every day, every hour, they perform the impossible. Not once since the war was a year old have they been able to hang out another 6 months. They'd be wiped from the earth. Their people would starve. They're wiped from the earth, and they remain. They starve and lay down their skinny bodies on the ground, and they stand up again with sleek bellies. They make preposterous, blind boasts. They say, "We'll overrun Romania in a month." Fantastic. It's done, they say. Russia, newborn Russia, strong young boy Russia, will put him out of it for good and all by Christmas. That was to cheer up the hungry ones in Berlin. Everybody saw through it. The very stars laughed. It's done, God. Howlet, it's like clockwork. It's like a rehearsed, abominable program. Yes, a program. The wounded man lay quite still and gazed at the star when he spoke. His words carried an odd sense of authenticity, finality. His mind had got a little away from him, and now it was working with the new oracular clarity of the moribund. It bothered the doctor inexplicably. It tripped him up. He had to shake himself. He began to talk louder and make wide, scarcely visible gestures. We've laughed so long, Howlet. There was Middle Europa. We always laughed at that. A dog's tail to think of it. A vast, self-sufficient, brutal empire laid down across the path of the world. Why, even if they had wanted it, it would be inevitable. The doctor held up for a full dozen seconds. A sort of indignation crossed his face, and his features reddened with passion. He couldn't make out. He spoke still louder. But they are doing it! They're doing that very same preposterous thing before our very eyes, and we cannot reach them. And they're Howlet damn near done. Behind that line there, you know the line I mean? That thin line of smoke and ashes and black blood, like a bent black wire over France. Behind that line, they are at work, day by day, month after month, building the empire we never believed. And Howlet, it's damn near done, and we can't stop it. It grows bigger and bigger, darker and darker. It covers up the sky like a nightmare, like a dream, said Howlet in low tones. A dream. There he stood, caught in a moment between his own desires and the ghostly silence of a ship that had held him suspended in the dark void. He'd often ask himself, what was it all about? This question haunted him at the edges of his mind, especially whenever he passed the shadow in the companionway. Every time he'd turn his head, achingly unwilling. One day he stopped, standing at the foot of a cot, staring down at a figure that lay motionless. For a brief moment, sweat beaded on his brow, only to be swept away by the relentless wind. Though used to death, this was different. Howlet had managed to fool him. In the deep silence, he heard the whisper, Howlet's voice, almost a soft plea. That's a bright star, Doctor. Meanwhile, a man in the Pullman smoking compartment was reading from his newspaper aloud to himself. Now here's a curious thing, he said, gathering the other strangers in the compartment around him. There's a dispatch about that Serbian who shot the Archduke of Austria. It says he died of tuberculosis. I thought they'd long since executed the fellow. Another man, sitting nearby, responded. They didn't execute him because he was underage. In Serbia, you can't execute someone under 21. The first man scoffed. Perhaps not here, but elsewhere. Laws don't hold much sway in cases like that. Another passenger chimes in, relating that the war effort has finally refocused, recalling that all began with an assassination. Still, one of the men who'd sat silent thus far, back in his seat, looking out of the window for a few moments, broke the silence. The murder may have been the provocation, he said, but what the historians fail to tell you are the circumstances that led to it. I was there when it happened, and saw the undeclared motives, the tiny, unclean forces who played their part, a subject best left alone, really. He shut his mouth decisively, as if he had said enough. Other men who sat at the table looked up and invited him to tell more about it, to which, after some hesitation, he assented. I was representing an American oil company in southeastern Europe, and my headquarters were in Vienna. I traveled widely, through lands populated by the Serb people. To better understand them, I learned the language and stayed in smaller Serb-run hotels when possible. He went on to describe one particular town, a place unknown to most Americans, but deeply embedded in the complex history of Bosnia. It was a small, picturesque city in a valley, with prosperous Serbs and peasants in traditional costumes, remnants of Turkish rule, and the Austrians who ruled the region after the Treaty of Berlin in 1878. These Austrians had beautified the town, building palaces and parks, perhaps to impress both outsiders and people themselves. The talk now turned to the long-cherished aspiration for liberty and unification on the part of the Serbs, not merely in Serbia, but all over the Balkans. He spoke of a Bosnian Serb family, one that he had known well and became friends with through business arrangements. Michael, the father, was practical and seemed to have resigned himself to the Austrians since a half-century of war and revolution. His son, Gavo, was different, being under the influence of his mother, Stana, who kept the burning passion of Serbian history and culture. The narrator and Gavo eventually became good friends. The boy had an avid thirst for knowledge about the United States, the freedom of life the place represented. The growing anti-Austrian thoughts of Gavo became strong with maturity and did start worrying the narrator. Being a young lad, he idealized the idea of revolution as a way of putting an end to oppression on his people. Still, the narrator knew of the danger involved in revolution, even as a sympathizer with the cause of the Serbs. With time, Gavo's feelings appeared to be intensifying. However, the narrator attempted, with some hope, to guide him away from such dangerous ambitions. A short conversation between the two in the hills of Bosnia revealed the depth of Gavo's commitment to his people's cause. Despite his personal feelings for Mara, a girl from the town who was becoming increasingly important to him, Gavo remained steadfast in his desire to fight for Serbian freedom, whatever the personal cost. Eventually, the narrator came to see that Gavo's relationship with Mara, a love story that seemed to bloom over time, might be the key to tempering his revolutionary fervor. Gabilo sighed profoundly, as if at the futility of making her see things from his angle. Then lugubriously he sang, "Thou art the dearest part of Serbia to me, but after all thou art but a part, even as I am a part, and it is Serbia, always Serbia." But Mara would not let him finish. "Enough!" she cried. "I abhor that song. You know how I abhor it." Gabilo looked at me and shook his head. "Oh, these women!" he exclaimed. "What they do to one!" Then, gazing reflectively at Mara, he added in the tone of one attempting to be philosophical, "Well, when a little female looks as angelic as my Mara, naturally we expect her to think like an angel too." At this, Mara's anger departed as quick as it had come. "There!" she cried, flinging her arms about his neck and kissing him on both cheeks. "There spoke my own dear Gabilo, poor Gabilo. What have I been saying? You know I love the Serbs no less than you do. You do know it, don't you?" "Well then, say so," Gabilo replied, gay. "God forbid that I should believe otherwise," he answered, kissing her in return. As I left them, I thought to myself that with Mara's temperament, to say nothing of the hundreds of children she promised him, Gabilo's married life would not prove monotonous, whatever else it might be. When in the course of the subsequent fall and winter I saw them again, they seemed as happy as a pair of wild birds. Once in the spring, when I was with them, the Kaguya chanced in some way to be mentioned, whereupon Mara at once darkened, saying to me, "That is my one sorrow." "But why should it be?" Gabilo asked her. "Have I not plighted you with my word that I shall not take part in any indiscretions that may be proposed?" "Yes, I have not forgotten you said that. As long as I loved you, you would be my good Gabilo," she answered. So he returned gay. "All you need do is to continue to adore me as I deserve." "But you meet with them at the kafana," she said uneasily. "They are my friends," he answered. "Naturally," he added, "then I meet with them. All men meet at the kafana. It is the way of men. A little wine or coffee or prune brandy and a little talk. That is all. I also go to church, but that does not make me a priest. And besides, dearest Mara, if I were not sometimes with the media, how would I know the joy of returning to you?" "If the devil had your tongue," laughed Mara, "he could talk all the saints out of heaven." So it always was with Mara. Her ideas came and went, as Gabilo once put it to me, like hummingbirds flitting in and out amongst the flowers. Never have I seen a human being turned from gay to grave and back again as rapidly as she. Arriving at the little hotel in the early part of June 1914, I found them all full of plans for a great fete to be celebrated on Vidovdankovo Day, June 28th. This day might be called the Serbian 4th of July, but it partakes also of the character of our Memorial Day, for it is the anniversary of the tragic event in Serbian history, the Battle of Kosovo, in which the Turks defeated the Serbs in 1389, leaving the entire Serbian nobility dead upon the field. That is one reason why Serbia has no nobles today. Kosovo means the field of the black bird, the kovo being a black songbird resembling the starling. But this was to be no ordinary celebration of the holiday, for in the Balkan War of the 2 preceding years, Serbia had consummated her independence and humbled the Turks, and a part of the Serbian racial dream was thereby realized. Mara, Gabilo, and their parents united in urging me to return for the festival, and before departing, I agreed to do so. True to my word, I arrived several days ahead of time. Gabilo had not returned from the academy when I reached the hotel, but Michael and Stanner gave me a warm welcome and produced the costumes they were intending to wear. I remember that Stanner said I ought to have a costume too, that even though I hadn't been so fortunate as to be born a Serb, they proposed to adopt me. "But you should see Mara's costume," she exclaimed when I admired hers. "It is a true Serbian dress, very old, which came to her from her great-grandmother. Such beautiful embroidery you have never seen." That made a good excuse for me to go and see Mara, whom I found sewing in the little garden behind the house. The costume, which she showed me, was indeed beautiful, and I admired it in terms that I hoped were sufficiently extravagant to please even a girl as exacting as she. Talking to her, I noticed a bird cage hung on a hook next to the window, and since I had never noticed it before, I asked whether she had a new bird. She just nodded while she continued working and walked over there. I looked at the bird. "Why," I said, "this is obviously a coup. Mara, probably." There was a note of surprise in my voice, for the coup is not meant to live in captivity. Mara looked up sharply. "Are you blaming me?" she asked. "Not at all," I answered, surprised by her tone. "I did not know that the cops could be tamed, that's all." "Did Gabilo tell you to speak to me about this?" she demanded. "Certainly not," I said. "I have yet to see Gabilo." And crossing over where she sat and looking down upon her, I asked, "What's the matter, Mara? How is it that I have managed to offend you?" She looked up at me, her eyes welling with tears. "You have not offended me, dear friend," she said. "It is only that I am made miserable by this subject. My relative, who is employed in the railway, caught this bird a few days since, placed it in a cage, and presented it to me. And if he is a handsome young fellow, am I to be censured for that? I am not his mother, nor yet his father. I did not make him handsome, and even so, what is a little bird to make words and black looks over? Do you mean that Gabilo is resentful because this bird has arrived?" she replied. "He begs me to let it go. He insists it will die. He declares the man who sold it to me is cruel, and that I am cruel also." "Then why not liberate it?" I urged. "It is dying in the cage." "Let it die, then," she exclaimed, and burst into a flood of tears. "Now, Mara," I urged, "when is the paroxysm all this about?" She gulped, wiping her eyes. "A girl must have a little character, must she not? She must make up her own mind occasionally about some little thing. Is that not true? Is the man she loves to tell her when to draw in her breath and when to let it go again? Is he to tell her when to wink her eyes? Is she to cease to think and do only as he thinks? Here came this young man with the miserable bird. I did not want it not. Then came Gabilo, black and angry like a storm out of the mountains, ordering me to let the bird go. I wished to do as Gabilo said, but as my relative had caught it and given it to me, I felt I should first speak to him. Besides, he is older and knows a great deal, being in the government railroads. And what did he say, Mara? He said, "You do as you wish. If you wish to be a little fool, humor this boy. He is spoiled. He has everything as he desires it. They say you are to marry him. Very well. But if you think always with his mind and hold no ideas of your own, I tell you, you will make a wife no better than one of those stupid Turkish women. That is why I am determined to retain the bird. There is a cause in every second tree. Well then, is it not better that this one die, than that my soul shall wither? Why should I be called Mara, if I shall no longer be a separate being, but only Gabilo in another body?" As she ceased, we heard Gabilo shouting her name from the street, and the next instant he came in at the garden gate. I could see at once that he was disturbed. "So you have come?" he exclaimed, seizing my hands. "Alas, my friend, it is too late. You have heard the evil news." "You mean about—" I had almost said, "about the bird." But fortunately he interrupted, exclaiming, "Yes, about the festival." "What tidings?" demanded Mara. Gabilo threw his arms above his head in a gesture of helpless fury. "Those pro-Set Shaba!" he burst out. "They issued an edict only an hour ago forbidding entirely our festival of Vidovdan." "No!" cried Mara, dismayed, half rising from her seat. "Yes," he said. "There shall be no celebration, not for the Serbs. Nothing attempted to commemorate the anniversary will result in arrest. It is announced that in place of our festival, there will, upon that day, be extensive maneuvers of the Austrian army, and that grand headquarters will be here in our city. We are given to understand that the Archduke himself will come and hold the review. Could anything be devised more, too?" Gabo spoke. "Insult us upon our national holiday. Oh, what vile tricks are not these? Accursed Schwabe capable. I am surprised, I said, that the Archduke would be party to a thing of this kind, for it is understood that he is pro-Serb. Certainly his wife is a Slav." Mara responded, "The more shame to her, then, for marrying him." Gabo continued, "He is the spawn of an autocrat, who is in turn the spawn of generations of autocrats. Scratch them, and they are all the same. They play the game of empire, the dirty game of holding together against their will the people of 7 races in Austria-Hungary, grinding them down, humiliating them, keeping them afraid. No man, no group of men should have such power. It is medieval, grotesque, wicked. More than that, it is unwise. They take a poor way to gain favor with us Serbs. For my part, I do not think it safe for the Archduke to come here." Gilo said, "Your judgment is perhaps better than even you yourself suppose. I doubt he will be foolish enough to come. At the last we shall be informed with a grand flourish that he is indisposed, not sick, you understand. Royalties are never sick. It is not etiquette. Peasants are sick, the middle classes are ill, the greater only indisposed. Anything else is vulgar." Gabo replied, "Well, I hope he will know enough to stay away. Otherwise, he may indeed become indisposed after his arrival." Mara then asked, "What do you mean, Gilo?" Gilo explained, "I mean that the air of this place is not good for Austrian royalties just now. It is Serbian air. There are the germs of freedom in it, and such germs are more dangerous to autocrats than those of cholera." Mara urged, "Be frank. Do you mean that the Archduke's life is threatened?" Gilo answered, "It is known that the governor has received warning letters. The Archduke is advised not to appear here on our holiday. One understands, moreover, that the Austrian secret police concur in this advice, which shows that the filthy beasts are not so stupid as they might be." Mara asked, "Assure me, O Mara, that your Kaguya has nothing to do with this threat." Gilo replied, "Long ago, I promised you that while you love me, I will not actively participate in anything violent. You may be sure, Maroma, that I shall keep my word. Mara said, You keep your word always. Gilo responded, And yet these threats disturb me, and I gain comfort from your reassurances. Gabo walked slowly over to the birdcage, asking, You are certain then that you do requite my affection? Mara replied, You are well aware that I worship you. Gilo then said, Would that I were as well aware of it. I am nothing to be worshipped. If you do love me, why not release this poor bird? See how wretchedly it huddles. Its eyes are becoming dull. It will surely die. How can we Serbs talk of freedom for ourselves, yet hold this wild creature prisoner? And of all birds, the koe, the bird of Kosovo. Permit me to open the door of the cage, Mara. Let us celebrate the Serbian holiday by liberating the poor creature. Schwaba cannot prevent that with all their edicts. Mara looked angry, saying, The holiday is not yet here. Gilo replied, When the day comes. Mara interrupted, The coup will be dead. I wish it were already dead. Gilo said, I wish I had never seen the accursed thing. It has brought me only sorrow. Gabo interjected, Why not let it fly away? Mara angrily responded, I have told you both. This means more to me than the life or death of a bird. It is a symbol. I have the feeling that if it were to fly away, all my will would fly with it. Gilo solemnly said, To me also, it is a symbol. It should be so to every Serb. Think of Kosovo. This is a bird, linked with our racial aspirations. If we free this one, we may perhaps ourselves deserve freedom. Otherwise, what do we deserve? Do we merit more than we ourselves give? Gabo, having witnessed Mara's agitation, thought he would stop Gilo, but he was engaged in putting some green leaves through the door of the cage. As he finished speaking, Mara rose, and dropping her sewing upon the ground, she ran into the house, bursting into tears. Mara! Cried Gilo, who ran also to catch her. He ran out to call after her. Mara! Gabo, turning to Gilo, said in an indignant tone, Can anybody understand the ways of women? As men grow old, do they understand better, or is it always like this? Gabo, forcing a smile, replied, You must ask some man older than I. Perhaps we are not meant to understand them. Gilo was silent for a moment of reflection. No doubt the Lord made them as they are so that we should forever be enthralled by them, as by any other enigma beyond comprehension. I enjoy lying on my back at night, gazing up at the stars, thinking profoundly of eternity whirling about us and the infinity of space. But I assure you, when my lovely Mara becomes agitated, those phenomena of nature seem, by contrast, trifling matters. I believe that if one could but understand Mara, one could understand the riddles of the ages. The next evening, Gabo saw Gilo whispering with 3 youths on the stairs. When he passed them, they grew silent, and Gilo rose up from them with a nervous smile. The next day, Gabo saw Gilo enter the same kafana with those youths. From the hasten at which he strode into the cafe, Gabo realized that Gilo was evading him. Before the maneuvers, Gabo cornered him after lunch, saying, Gilo, I beg you to remember Mara and your promise to her. Do not become entangled in any rash escapade. Gilo stood still, formulating a reply, then said, I have remembered. I have positively refused to participate in certain matters in which I have been pressed to become active at this moment. Gabo responded, That is all I desire to know. What of Mara? Gilo answered, All is well between us, so long as one mentions not the bird. Later, Gabo found them together in the garden. Mara was sewing, and Gilo started plucking fresh leaves for the birdcage. Mara, who had been boasting how the Serbs were to leave their shutters closed all day so they wouldn't see the Austrians, fell silent while she watched him narrowly. She then said, Gilo, please put no more leaves into the cage. Gilo asked, Why not? Mara insisted, Because it is not well for him. He has been pecking at the leaves and I think they poisoned him. Gilo responded, No. Mara replied, Yes, He appears miserable today, but naturally. Jilo said, "That is not new. He is dying. See how he is huddled with closed eyes in the corner of the cage." Jilo plucked another leaf, and Mara ominously said, "If he should die, it will be because of the leaves which you have given him." Jilo replied, "Impossible. Doesn't a bird live among the leaves?" Mara exclaimed, "I have asked the old birdman about it. He says some leaves are good and some are not. He's coming this evening to see the coup and give it medicine in its wall water." Jilo pressed the point no farther, dropping the fresh leaves on the ground, feeling relieved. Later that night, as Gabo strolled toward the hotel from the square, he spotted Jilo coming out of the kafana with several of the other youths. Jilo stepped out to join him and together went to Mara's garden gate. Jilo stopped and said, "Let us in and see the poor bird." Gabo warned him, "No, Jilo, it is not the bird we are going to see, but Mara." Jilo remarked, "So be it. Let us then see Mara." Mara was inside the house. Jilo yelled her name, and Mara replied from the house, then went forth to meet them. As she came out, Gabo caught sight of her at the bird cage. She looked at it for a moment and let out a shriek, "Oh, the cook is dead!" True enough, there lay the bird on its back among the dry leaves at the bottom of the cage. We stood in silence looking at it through the bars for some time. I knew that Gabo and Mara were full of feelings, and for my own part, I was surprised to discover how much the death of the bird seemed to mean to me. When, a day or two before, they had spoken of symbolism in connection with the Ko, I knew what they meant, but did not feel it yet. Now I felt it strongly, as though I myself were a Serb with a Serb's vision and superstition. It was not a dead bird I saw, but a climax in a parable, a story of scriptural flavor fraught with uncanny meaning. Gabilo was the first to speak. "Poor Ko," he said in a low, tragic tone. "It is free at last. It was written that it should not be captive. When tomorrow dawns—" "What do you mean?" demanded Mara. "I told you it was destined to die unless you let it go," he answered gently. "And as I would not let it go," she retorted, "you desired that it should die in accordance with your prophecy?" "Yes, that is it. You killed it. You put the leaves of henbane into its cage and killed it." "You are flushed, Mara," he answered. "You must know that I wanted the poor bird to live. Let us dig a little grave here in the garden and bury it, and cease to speak of it until we are calmer. We are overwrought, both of us, because of the bitterness of tomorrow. Where is the spade?" "Do not touch the Ko," she commanded. "It shall not be buried yet." "Why not?" I intervened. "It will be better for us all." "The old birdman comes this evening," Mara flung back. "He will look at the bird and know that Gabilo has poisoned it with henbane." "But Mara," I returned, "Gabilo has said that he did not." "You know that he is truthful. His words mean nothing," she cried. "Am I not a Serb? Do I not read the meanings in events? Gavo lies. Gavo killed the Ko. He is a murderer. I hate him." "Ah," he exclaimed, "you give me the truth at last." "Yes, the truth. So much the better that I know in time," cried Gavo, and without another word, he ran frantically from the garden. As for Mara, she seemed almost on the brink of madness. I do not know how long I remained there trying to reason with her, calm her, make her see the folly and danger of what she had done. By the time her passion had abated, the late June twilight had settled over the town. Presently, I heard the garden gate open, and a moment later, a venerable Serb appeared. "Wait," Mara said to me. "Now you shall learn that I was right." Then, to the old man, she said, "You are too late to cure my bird. But you are not too late to tell me what caused its death. Look at this leaf that was placed in its cage. Isn't that the henbane?" The old man took the leaf, inspected it, and shook his head. "No," he said. "Let me see the bird. It lies there in the cage." He opened the cage door and, reaching in, removed the little body. "Ah," he said, "accursed. Do you not know, my child, that birds of this species cannot long survive captivity? Mara hung her head. I have heard it said, she answered in a low voice, to imprison wild birds is cruel. These birds in particular are the serbs of the air, said the old birdman. They are of bird stock that saw the field of Kovo. They only want to be free. Then, without an answer from Mara, he said, bring a light. She went into the house and emerged with a lamp, placing it upon a table near the door. The old birdman sat down beside the table, and holding the bird near the light, brushed back the soft plumage of its breast, much in the manner of peasant mothers whom one sees occasionally searching with unpleasant suggestiveness in their children's hair. Look, he said, the bird would have died of these, even if it had survived captivity. It is covered with animal culé. In a cage, it could not rid itself of them as nature enables free creatures to do. Looking at the bird's breast, Mara and I could see the deadly vermin. Give me a spade, said the old man. I will bury the bird here in the garden. Mara pointed to a spade leaning against the wall. Then, turning with supplicating eyes to me, she took both my hands and said in a low, intense voice, Go, I pray to you, and seek Gavo. Tell him that I pray for his pardon. Say that I love him better than all the world, and beg him to come to me straight away. I proceeded directly to the hotel in Gavo's room. He was not there. Nobody around the place had seen him. I then went to the kafana, which I knew he patronized, but the proprietor declared that he knew nothing of his whereabouts. During the rest of the evening, I searched the town quite diligently, going to the houses of all his friends, but nowhere could I find a trace of him. Finally, obliged to acknowledge myself beaten, I went back to the hotel. Several times that night I got up and slipped to his room, but daylight came without his appearing. At earliest morning, I went once again to the kafana, but as far as I know now at home, the Archduke arrived the previous night along with his wife and entourage and is put into the governor's palace, but nothing was reported regarding missing a little lad. Wherefore, after breakfast, it became my unpleasant duty to go to Mara, inform her of my failure and comfort her as best I might. She looked ill and terrified. I wished that she would weep, thinking perhaps to find him in the central square of the town before the Archduke, the governor, and the other officials set out for the review. I was going in that direction when there came to my ears the dull sound of an explosion. Continuing on my way, I encountered, as I rounded the next corner, a scattering crowd of men, women, and children running toward me in the street. I asked 2 or 3 of them what had happened, but they ran on without reply. Presently, among them, I saw one of the youths with whom I had several times seen Gabilo, and him I seized by the coat, demanding information. "Let me go," he cried. "Someone threw a bomb into the Archduke's carriage. They are arresting everyone. Get away." "And have you seen Gavo?" "Not today." "Is the Archduke dead?" "No. He warded off the bomb, and it exploded beneath the carriage which followed. For God's sake, let me go." I did so, and walked on toward the square. Halfway down the block, I encountered some Austrian police. They questioned me briefly and let me go, after which I questioned them. The horses drawing the second carriage had been killed, they said, and some officers of the Archducal suite injured. The Archduke, however, insisted upon continuing to the review and would presently pass. They advised me to return to my hotel. I had hardly reached my room when I heard a bugle and the clatter of hooves outside. Going to the window, I saw mounted men of the Royal Austrian Guard advancing around the corner. Behind them, between double rows of cavalry, came several landaus carrying outriders and driven by coachmen in white wigs and knee breeches. As the first of these vehicles came near enough to be identified, I recognized the occupants of the rear seat as Francis Ferdinand, Archduke of Austria, and heir presumptive to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and his morganatic wife, the Duchess of Hohenberg. The shutters of most of the houses were closed, but in a few windows I could see faces, and here and there were scattered groups of people on the sidewalk who were closely watched by policemen riding ahead on horseback and on bicycles. As the archducal carriage made its way, hats were thrown up, and once or twice I caught faint cheering, to which the Archduke and his Duchess responded by touching the visor of his helmet, and she by a movement of her head, as their carriage came under my window, and I saw the expression of condescending goodwill frozen on both their faces. I thought of the constant apprehension there must be behind those polite masks. It struck me as amazing that a man and woman could be found in these times to play the royal part. As I was thinking thus, I saw a dark-clad figure dart out suddenly from somewhere on the sidewalk below, pass swiftly between the horses of the bodyguard, and reach the side of the royal carriage. Some of the guardsmen sprang at once from their horses, and there was a dash of policemen toward the man, but before anyone laid hands on him, he raised one arm as if pointing accusingly at the Archduke and his Countess, and then came, in swift succession, two sharp reports. I saw the royal pair fall forward simultaneously. The carriage stopped and was at once surrounded by an agitated group of soldiers, policemen, and servants, while another and more violent group pressed about the individual who had fired the shots, beating him as they swept him away down the street. They had taken only a dozen yards when a high official, leaping out of the second carriage, rushed up and motioned them to take him on the sidewalk. I turned that way and witnessed how the crowd swung my direction. Not until then did I ever catch a glimpse of the poor wretch's face. It was poor Gavo. For a moment there was a stunned silence while all of us sat silent. The picture he has given us didn't seem, as one would imagine such a man, an assassin. Do you mean, the man by the window spoke slowly, that this very boy here, whom you have been describing, was the fellow who shot Archduke? Yes, said the other. He was Gabilo, Principe of Saro. Good Lord, cried the third. The boy who brought on the war. As we were saying earlier, replied the first, the one who had told the tale. Historians will doubtless trace the beginnings of the war to Gavo's shot. Austria used the shot as her excuse, alleging that a plot to kill the Archduke had been hatched in Serbia, which was absolutely untrue. For Serbia was afraid of nothing so much as of giving offense to Austria, knowing well that Austria was only seeking a pretext to pounce upon her, precisely as she had earlier pounced upon Bosnia and Herzegovina, annexing them. And it was after a thoughtful pause that he added, Poor Gabilo, I am glad to know that he is free at last. Like Mara's starling, he was not one to live long in a cage. And it is perhaps because I was so fond of him, and also because Austria's excuse was so transparently despicable, that I shall always go behind the shooting, thinking of the beginning of the war as I conceive it. It was Mara's anger that released Gavo from the promise which otherwise would have withheld him. And it was the death of the caged starling that brought on her anger, and it was the animal coolie that caused the bird's death. That is, said the man by the window, you prefer to trace the war down to such a small beginning as the death of that caged bird? Rather, said the other, to a still smaller and more repulsive beginning, to the vermin which destroyed the bird. It seems to me I see them always crawling through the explanations, apologies, excuses, war messages, and peace overtures of the tonic autocrats.